Hello there, and welcome to the House of D podcast. I'm your host, D Square, and of course, we have with us once again Volsker. How's it going?
How's it going, man? You know, off of work for the day. It's time to relax.
All right, good. Well, I appreciate you coming on here and helping me here with your takes here, being our movie buff and Batman buff and TV show, all the areas that I really don't know a whole lot about. So,
My
thank
pleasure.
you. Yeah, definitely. So, we were just kind of talking before the podcast started here, kind of a slow news week. So, we'll get into a couple of things here. And you also had a real interesting video out on your YouTube channel. Definitely check that out. And of course, you can at me at dsquare72 on Twitter if you have any questions here for the show or any suggestions. That's where you can reach me here. And of course, Volsker is also on Twitter at Volsker. Let's go ahead and get into our main topic right now. Of course, the big comic event is the House of X, Powers of X, the Hickman story here that's kind of reshaping the X-Men. It's had a lot of interesting things happen to it. Learning about Moira and her mutant power and her different lives and really starting to take shape here. One thing that I will definitely talk about before we kind of go through this issue, it's something that definitely has kind of frustrated me is people are kind of saying that this issue, I've even saw people say it's trash. Now, these
hmm
aren't really people that I've seen on a consistent basis or
Too
anything.
much
So,
talking and crap like that.
right,
That's yeah.
right. And, me myself, even on my channel, the YouTube channel, when I reviewed it, I gave it an 8.5 when, I had given the others, 10s and maybe a 9 or 9.5 or something like that. So even in my own review, it definitely was lower than the other issues. But I
hmm
will tell you that I just, as far as saying it's trash, that's just, to me, that's really somebody that's unlearned, I guess, in comics. I don't know if it's just that hype is kind of releasing. We're settling in, to this universe now. So, I mean, that's going to happen with any comic book story arc. You are, finally going to settle in. I still think this was a great comic. I just, have to comment that even though my score wasn't as high, and
hmm
honestly, reading it a couple of times more, I would bump that score up to a 9, really. Just a lot of interesting stuff in here that, so just out of line, basically, if you're saying this is trash. What are your initial thoughts?
So I agree with you there. I'll easily say that it was not the strongest. Now it
Mm-hmm.
has a lot in common with, for example, House of X or House of Ten's first issue, where it was just a lot of fluff around the story. It's kind of building that world, and this one takes a lot more of the future than it does any of the other timelines, which we've only got bits and pieces of what year was it 100 and 1000, and this kind of
Yeah.
takes place and starts building a little bit more on those later years because all the other previous issues mainly focused on the now.
Right. Especially the House of X has definitely focused on the year 10, year 10 timeline portion. But definitely, it goes through just like the other House of X number
hmm
one went through the various timelines. So did this one, and we got to see really interesting moments from each timeline. So the year one, we get to see where Moira takes Xavier to meet Magneto. They
hmm
already have opposing ideologies at this point,
Yes.
but what's really impactful is that um, they want to show something to Magneto, and in order to
hmm
do so, he has to remove his helmet. Xavier asks for him to trust him. He does, and so with Xavier's help, he's able to get all of these images from Moira, showing his failures, showing, when he was on trial, just really down moments
hmm
for Magneto throughout her various
Those 10
lives.
year
Right.
lives. Yeah. which we found out was a really big imperative in one of the previous issues, which, kind of throwing this in here, I find is so fucking funny.
Yeah.
The House of X, Powers of X, House of 10, Powers of 10. Actually, the funny thing is, and they haven't come out right and said it, but I think the whole reason it's actually the technical pieces, House of 10, Powers of 10, is because of these different 10 different what is it, periods of time that Myra has lived. Like, I was like, wait a minute, mind blown. What the fuck? How did I not catch that? So I just found it funny.
Yep, and well, yeah, it definitely would be. You know, there's definitely a theme here. You know, as well as each timeline is like to the 10th power, so that's why you got X to the 0th power, and so on and so forth, all equaling up to 1,000 years. So, yeah, definitely very interesting. And all throughout those timelines, you know, none of them, as of yet, of course, we are on the 10th timeline here, and that's what we're seeing. You know, that's what this story is. Right, yeah, still a dark cloud. In her 9th life, there was a ... so who knows? And we'll get into maybe a little theory later on. But, so she shows Magneto all this stuff, and Xavier, you know, tells him, you know, we're always apart, so we lose. So, basically, they're going to stick together, and so this time we win. And I remember that when me and you talked about this before, it's like, man, it's almost like a brotherhood of evil mutants. You know, we kind of understand now why Xavier is so different, because in essence, he really has been forced to go over to Magneto's side. You know, it's more than survival. We have to thrive. And so, you know, that's another reason why Magneto actually joins him. And he even tells him, like, Charles, you know, I'm telling you, I'm not going to soften up. You know, if you you know, do some pacifist, you know, stuff, or you start to falter, you know, I'm gonna be checking you every way, shape, or form. So it's just interesting that we see how they've come together now. All three of them are together. We see why, you know, when we talked about, man, it's almost like the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, is because in essence it almost is. Like Xavier, because of what he knows, because of what Moira has taught him about her past lives, he's not taking that pacifist, protect the people that hate and fear us approach. He's, again, taking that hardline stance. We have to do more than survive. We have to thrive. So, interesting.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like, it too kind of puts Xavier in a bind, because he's basically the only one who hasn't taken a different route.
Exactly. He's always, so this is definitely a major shift for him. And so that's what we see of the year 1 timeline. Then we go to the year 10 timeline. This is the timeline that we started with House of X number 1. In House of X number 2, this is that timeline, the pod people on Krakoa and wanting sovereignty. And we also find out about this giant sentinel head, which is like a master mold orbiting the sun that Orchis has made. So we see here... in this comic here, when they go to year 10, you know, they've retrieved the information. Of course, Sabretooth, Mystique, and Toad did. That information they retrieved. The mutants are now examining it with Krakoa. They're not even using computers at this point. Like, Krakoa, even though it's a plant, is like reading technology and whatnot. And they've got all this information. They know about Orchis. They know the fact that it's made up of S.H.I.E.L.D., AIM, Sword, Hammer, even some ex-Hydra agents, which really kind of accentuate the fact of how serious this group is. But nonetheless, they know that there's a big giant master mole floating around the sun, and that's going to be a problem. Because for those of you that don't know, they showed this in the animated series, so you may know, Alan, but master moles basically... they just mass produce Sentinels. And do you remember that from the cartoon?
Off the top of my head, I'm gonna have to say no, because it's been so long. But I mean, it sounds familiar, and I remember some of the episodes where they're just like popping them out, like, you know,
right,
fucking firearms just down the line.
Right, exactly. But eventually they just start. basically it's Sentinels making Sentinels. And that's what makes the Sentinels a threat. It's not because always, if they throw 3 or 4 Sentinels at the X-Men, they end up, destroying them. But it's just that the Sentinels never tire. They keep coming. They keep coming. Anyway, so that's why they can't let this happen, because they'll be easily overwhelmed at this point. And in examining this data, not only do they learn about that, but they learn about the fact that they're making this next generation Sentinel. And now they know what it's Nimrod. And so realize, now we know that Xavier and Magneto and probably everyone else they shared this with know about all these timelines, so they know about Nimrod. This really distresses them. So Xavier's saying, we have to send a team to that Master Mole to destroy it head on.
Let's be on the offense this time.
Right. And this is like, basically Magneto's like, this is suicide. This is a suicide mission. And then Cyclops is a badass here, because he's just like, hey, does this need to get done? And Xavier's like, yeah, it does. So he's like, then it will be done. So that will be that'll be interesting to see. So we're starting to see the conflict between the mutants and Orchis, or basically the machines, in the year 10 timeline. Now, they move on to year 100, and this is, of course, the timeline with Rasputin and Cardinal and those group of mutants that are on Asteroid K, because there's only a couple mutants on Asteroid K. The rest are somewhere in the Shi'ar Empire, and, they were able to steal that information from the machines. It's Nimrod the Lesser and this Omega Sentinel, those are kind of the ruling people right now. But nonetheless, so we catch up with those mutants. We see Rasputin. We see Cardinal. We see, the green Magneto-looking guy. We see Wolverine. But
we find out who their leader is.
Apocalypse, which is like, what? Apocalypse and this sarcophagus in the back. So this is... So that's real significant, because really the overlying theory just on the internet in general, and I share this, that's Moira. Something to do with Moira. This has something to do with that timeline in which she teamed up with Apocalypse, but then quote unquote died. But again, if you go back to that chart, there's no definitive death for Moira in that timeline. So how does she then reincarnate if she doesn't die? I don't know. Perhaps in fact, that's going to be my theory, is that's the purpose of this sarcophagus. That's what, Apocalypse has been able to help produce. So somehow the sarcophagus, kills her so she can reincarnate, but maybe now at some point she can pop back out of it. I don't know. That's all speculation. But speculation aside, though, what we learn is that, there's 2 mutants that died in House of X. One, that's Silobel, and she was the one that was put in the green muck that survives all the way to year 1000, by the way. So she could definitely be a factor there, but also Percival. And so what Wolverine is explaining, and again, they haven't explained what this Wolverine is, or this Magneto, or I'm pretty sure they're just first generation Chimera mutants, so they only have a single power, but nonetheless, the guy looks exactly like Wolverine. What he explains, that the mission was a success, they got this information, but without Percival, I guess Percival's power was cloaking them from the machines. And so now that mutant's gone, they're no longer going to be able to get into the city in order to steal the next piece of information they needed. Because the information that they were able to steal wasn't the information they needed. It was something that would point them to the information they needed, because the machines collect so much data that knowing what you're looking for isn't really going to help you, because there's just so much data that they have to know exactly where it's at. So now they know where it's at. And this is where Apocalypse comes in. We see them hand this codex. We see a blue hand reach out. And then, it shows Apocalypse, this mysterious sarcophagi behind him. And it's like, he's like your prototypical, he's definitely a softer edge to him, but your prototypical Apocalypse, and he's like, hey, look at me, because they're like, this, I would sacrifice all of you to get this information. Like, straight up tells him that. Because they're thinking, oh, we lost 2 mutants, was it worth it? And yeah, Apocalypse is like, no, this was worth it. I would have killed all of you to do this.
It's kind of crazy too, because that's kind of you see an interesting side of this Wolverine-esque character, whether it's actual Wolverine or his son or whatever may be the case.
Yeah.
But he's even like, hey, we can't do this. Like, he's one of the ones that's kind of like, I mean, he's not the badass Wolverine that we're used to. Like, fuck it, let's go do it. Like, he's very hesitant on doing anything from here on out.
Well, and the theory is that is actually still the actual Wolverine. In which case, Apocalypse mentions something here, and here's another interesting theory: is that Wolverine says all that, says I don't see how we can make it back into the city, and then Apocalypse looks at Rasputin and Cardinal and says, you'll have to forgive him. War has a way of limiting perspective. It's a shortcoming of that seed. So, Apocalypse has 4 horsemen normally. 4 mutants that he normally imbues with. You've seen this in the Apocalypse movie. One of those horsemen is named War. So, I don't know if he's referring to this Wolverine character as War, or I don't know. It's interesting there, but that is another theory. Again, he could just be referring to him thinking in a certain manner.
Which is also kind of interesting, too, because the whole seed reference makes me wonder if mutants die, if they can regrow them at will with, like, DNA or something.
Right, exactly. And that kind of goes along with, me thinking that this Wolverine-looking guy, Magneto-looking guy, the tree guy, which the tree guy mentions later in this comic, that, yeah, he's basically... he just has the powers of a mutant that did exist. So that leads me to believe that these characters are all like first issue chimeras.
Mm-hmm.
So staying in this timeline though, they check in with Nimrod, who is aware that the mutants got away with something. He doesn't know exactly what they got away with. He doesn't exactly know the importance of it, but he's kind of talking about it. He's got these 2 human guards by him or whatever, and he kind of tries to include them in the conversation for whatever reason, and so one of them is like, no, I really wish you would just keep talking to yourself, I'm tired. And yeah, he just kind of kills these 2 humans.
He just blasts them, bro.
Picks up the skull and then starts talking to it again. So yeah, definitely
interesting.
Yeah. Then we just kind of catch up with the rest of the other mutants. Like I said, that one that's got Tom Cassidy's powers, the Zorn-looking one. We see that, again, they're using, like, these plants to interface with computers and make a computer display. And so they're just kind of talking about this plan and the fact that it's going to be a suicide mission because they don't have the mutant that blocks... that makes them stealth to the machines. And we see part of this file name pop up that they're looking at, Genesis Protocols versions / Nimrod. So who knows exactly what that means, but apparently they're going to go after it, even if it means they can't hide themselves from the machine. And this is so important that, Apocalypse, as he has his hand on the sarcophagus, is saying, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to lead you. We're going to go there, and we're going to return. So, a little bit of a leadership there by Apocalypse.
There's technically 2 versions of Nimrod, isn't there? Lesser and then greater or whatever?
The greater is in the next timeline, which is the 1000 year.
That's one that looks like a ghost, little floating thing.
Right, like the thing from Halo. And of course, he's there with what he keeps referring to as the librarian.
Yeah.
So this is where this comic is really, it takes a turn it really just goes supersonic with the scientific techno babble.
Yeah, this is the part that I was just like, what the
Um,
fuck did I just read?
well, so basically, what I glean from this is on the scale of intelligent beings, humans don't even,
Their spec
in the
is
types
nothing.
of societies, basically, humans don't even register. And so they go to a machine that has average intelligence, and the next level is hive mind, and then you've got super intelligence. Anyway, just so we don't lose anybody or lose ourselves, basically what happens is this new race, these race of librarians, of which there is a young and old, and I have a theory here that I'll go over once I try to explain this. But anyway, they have set into motion a plan where they basically took a Nimrod shell, so whatever that is, I don't know. It sounds like a Nimrod body, and it's full of their technology, and they basically shoot it into space. And there's a chart for this, that shows you where it started and the trajectory it goes, and it basically goes through space, eats up these other worlds, takes up its resources, and it does this to a couple of moons, and then finally lands in its last place called Nimbus. It was a planet. It takes those resources and becomes basically a hive mind world intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
All this, so that this race of librarians can prove that they're so smart and advanced that the
Superior.
phalanx will come
Mm-hmm.
and integrate them in, find them worthy enough to have them assimilate into this phalanx. So this is more than a hive mind. It's just a singular entity, and it brings this ascension, which is what
Yep.
these librarians want. Now, these two librarians here that they show, they've got the young one and the old one. I think the old one is Moira McTaggart. I think it's going to turn out to be her.
Interesting.
Because she's going to figure out that ascension is the only way that this is, that this is ever going to move on.
Yeah, because I mean, at this point, other than what's inside of the controlled environment, there really isn't mutants left.
Right, exactly. Which is a good point. So what does that mean? Is this whole X-Men universe going to be rebooted by those guys somehow? Like, that's what I keep thinking about. But I don't know why they want this ascension. The Phalanx was something. It's a just an entity out there that that does it's kind of like the Borg from Star Trek Next Generation. So it's interesting that they're bringing them back in, but obviously in a much more stronger light. I have
Mm-hmm.
no clue what this means though, because honestly, that was back when I kind of started to wane in my interest in comics. So, but the Phalanx was something back in the '90s. Looks like they're kind of bringing them back. They're like these super intelligent space gods that absorb societies that are worthy and call it ascension. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow Moira or these blue librarians know about it, and that's what they've orchestrated. I don't know what that means to the rest of
Yeah.
the X-Men or whatever's going on there, but yeah, that's where this issue probably lost a lot of people, a lot of scientific techno babble, and so yeah, interesting. But just going back to people that are saying this is somehow not that good of an issue, I'm going to have to disagree there.
Mm-hmm. I'm same way here. I do have a question.
Yeah.
That reading these, basically, we're looking at, as of right now, set timelines. I'm wondering, with the reveal of Myra and her powers, branching this knowledge off with everybody, if what occurs in year 10 and year 100, if things start to happen differently through these timelines, if it will start to alter the future.
Yeah, it definitely could. I will say though, I recently read something where Hickman was asked or kind of taken to task as far as like, how is this, whole new timelines, how is this affecting, various aspects. And he did kind of go on to explain that
Hmm.
her whole reincarnation, whatever time skipping, that really all of that was just so he could bring her back. So so we'll see, because it really just sounds like some sort of mechanism that we're not meant to think too deeply into. It was just, hey, this is a character I wanted to bring back and change a little bit. So we'll
Unless
definitely,
it's a ploy.
yeah, that could
Because you don't
definitely
want,
be.
if you have, years of content planned, you don't want to ruin it.
Well, and that's the thing with comics. So now they can definitely say, they can do stuff in all of these timelines. They could
Hmm.
go back to, that fourth life where it shows all the decades of the X-Men that, I've basically read over the years. And it states how it ends, but you can still interject things in there. And so, yeah, they'll be able to do all sorts of wacky stuff. That's for sure. All right. Well, we'll be excited for the next one. So now this is where the numbering gets goofy. I mean, it doesn't really get
Yeah.
goofy, but so far we've been doing, House of X, Powers of 10, House of X, Powers of 10. So that, with that same pattern, then we would expect a House of X3. Uh, at this point, it'll be this week when this podcast is released. But we're sticking with Powers of 10. So we're going to get Powers of 10
two
number
weeks in a row.
3. Yep, 2 weeks in a row. And then at some point, it'll do 2 House of X in a
Yep.
row. So,
And then it will come back and wrap up going the normal HOX, POX, HOX, POX.
yeah. Powers of 10, number 6, will be the absolute last one, which will be interesting. Okay, well, just a couple more, a couple of brief news items here for us today. Real interesting, something that may frustrate you if you're a Deadpool fan. So,
Yes, I know where you're going with this.
so yeah, looks like the writers that are currently writing it, Scotty Young and Nick Klein, their run on the series is done. They're going to, hand it off to another team. But and so they've done Deadpool 1 through 15, and then there was a Deadpool annual done.
Yep.
That was done by Dana Schwartz and Riley Brown. And then they're going to start with Thompson and Bachalo. But instead of doing Deadpool number 16, they're gonna reboot it and do a new Deadpool number 1. This would now make it basically the sixth volume of Deadpool, over Deadpool's history.
Which is kind of interesting too, because it actually, from what I read, releases, I believe, like a week or two after the Absolute Carnage versus Deadpool comic. So it's kind of weird because from what I got out of that article was the Absolute Carnage versus Deadpool will be in its own continuity with the Absolute Carnage storyline, and this Deadpool reboot will be completely different on its own,
Yeah, I got the same
which is
impression.
really fucking weird. Like, use this as a jumping point, but no, it's going to be literally two stories going alongside to have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why they would mess with the continuity like that. I don't know why the comic book writers don't and editors don't understand that we like continuity. I mean, we understand a reboot here or there if a character needs an update. But yeah, no reason to do that. And it doesn't exactly sound like a reboot. It just sounds like they're just turning it back to number 1, and so it is still Deadpool number 16 basically, but they're just deciding to make it another volume. So I just think that's going to be a really bad precedent to set if every time your comic series changes writers and artists, that it starts a whole nother volume.
I agree.
I mean, maybe that's the way they're going to go, but I see that frustrating people. But at the same time, I can understand the strategy. I was just in the comic book store the other day, and we were talking to the owner who, was saying, like, I know that established comic fans get frustrated when they go back to number one, but the thing is that they want to sell comic books, and the numbers just show that when they do a number one, more people come in to buy it. So
It's really weird.
that's a deadly cycle there, a deadly cycle there. Okay. Anything in the news that you saw that was interesting?
Um, One thing that I'm curious to see, looks like rumors are floating around that Sony is going to try to replicate the success that Endgame had by potentially re-releasing Spider-Man: Far From Home as an extended edition back in the theaters.
So now we're starting to get ridiculous with this stuff.
But I agree with that. I'm excited to see because I love the film. I think what they're trying to do is kind of trying to replicate that financial success that Endgame had for Disney and Marvel, because it was just announced that Spider-Man: Far From Home is actually the highest grossing film of Sony's all time.
I get it. I mean, I'm not against it really.
Gotta get that money.
They're available so quick on digital that there really is only a 3 or 4 month time period in which it stops playing in the theaters from the times it goes to your DVD player. But I mean, hey, if people didn't go to them, they wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
So if, having your best superhero, your latest superhero movie in the theaters for a long time, I mean, if it's worth it for everybody, then I totally get it. I would, love to take the kids to maybe see that movie, because you could go into a theater and maybe not a lot of people be in there or whatnot, so you're not worried about, them disturbing others. So, I mean, I get it. It makes money. It just, I don't know if it's going to skew kind of the view of, top box office and stuff like that. If all you have to do is leave your movie on the theaters for 4 years, then, I mean, but of course, again, they're only going to do that if people are going to see it. They're not just going to give up that space. So,
Yeah.
it's just kind of cheap, it seems like. I mean, I loved Endgame, and so, okay, we haven't beaten the top yet. Let's just put it back in theaters until we get there. But, whatever. At the
Add
same
extra
time,
4
though,
minutes.
I mean, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's kind of a cheap move, but, I mean, I'm not too against it, because it is an experience. I know TVs are big now and digital looks nice and all of that stuff, but it's not exactly the same as going to a theater.
It's not. I mean, even like yesterday, like I went to go see Good Boys, and I mean, there's what, 10 people in the theater, I think, but it's the experience is what sells it. And
Yeah.
even like from my experience with film classes that I was in, you honestly really don't get the full effect of a movie unless you're sitting there with a crowd. Comedies, the laughter, the gasp.
Sure, when Captain America got Mjolnir.
Exactly. That's exactly where I
Like,
was
the
going.
whole
Like,
theater was like, I mean, it was,
yes.
and they were clapping. Like, yeah, no, exactly. I'll never experience that again, ever, with that movie.
It was a great time, and I love that fucking fight.
Well, they do the X-Men right. They got some badass stuff too, but they got to do it right. And this whole Russo saying that, I don't know, they're talking about Wolverine again, and it's like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
There's so much more you can do with these characters. I mean, you're already going to have to do an Xavier Magneto thing. That's always going to be a focus of the X-Men. But there's other characters that you could focus. Cyclops, they needed to stop with the whole, like, Cyclops versus Wolverine, like. I don't know.
Fucking
Well,
X3 puts a bad taste in my mouth with
I
Cyclops.
know. Like, well, because yeah, of course. If you don't know better, you're just like, oh, look at this dorky guy. Like, and so yeah, they kill him just so that Wolverine and Jean Grey can. It's like they wanted Jackman to win an Oscar for that role. Just yeah, fucking ridiculous.
You know what would be cool though, I'm not gonna lie, is thinking of what we're kind of diving into with a House of X and Powers of X, like the Krakoa and the growing. That would, boom, perfect way to start implementing that shit in the MCU.
Yeah, that would be an interesting direction. I'm really anxious to see how they're going to do this. I really hope they stick this landing. I really, really do. I that would be that would be fine. But me personally, I would like to see it where like the X-Men were always there, mutants were always there. Maybe not so many numbers, and that's why they
Mm-hmm.
were able to hide. But maybe that's what happens. The because they want to. It sounds like they want to center it around the Thanos snap or the Hulk snap, perhaps. That's fine if they want to do that, but what I want them to do, what makes the most sense, so they can stick with continuity as much as possible from the
Mm-hmm.
comics, is have that snap just exacerbate the mutant thing. That has
Spread the gene.
yeah, exacerbate the X gene. Still have the early X-Men, Magneto being a Holocaust survivor, but again, they're going to have to find some way to de-age him, which it's at this point though they should be able to do it no problem. Um, and they could even I don't know they could even say his power and he can manipulate the iron in his blood and slow down his aging. I don't know, but anyway, but just to keep with that, to keep with that, and then yeah, boom, the
Mm-hmm.
snap happens, and Xavier can no longer hide all the mutants because there's so many of them. So that's how they need to do it.
I just hope they actually focus on the X-Men. I love Wolverine, don't get me wrong. Like we were talking about the rumors about introducing him first with the Avengers when the new
Yeah.
Avengers and things come around. But, I'm absolutely fine building the X-Men up right. And I mean, even shit, do movies like First Class, go back in the past, find a way to have them in hiding where people didn't know about it. You can even do something like the government had them hiding or covering it up, and then wants to shit battle New York and the snap and all that.
Yeah.
That's when just the top blew off. I just don't want it to be, only about Wolverine. Now, don't get me wrong, I would love to see finally Wolverine Deadpool going at it, or Wolverine just getting mouthy with a bunch of other characters, Hawk versus Wolverine. But there's so many other characters that really were failed, like Colossus, in the
Right.
original X-Men movies. Thankfully, he got a little bit of redemption in the two Deadpool films, but how are they going to do that if they come with Deadpool 3 or reboot that movie series? Like, are they going to keep Colossus there as a separate character? Is he? Because if they kind of roll that over, then right there, the X-Men are already around.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. But are they? I mean, I love Colossus' portrayal in the Deadpool movies, but one nitpick I have is like they don't actually have a human actor for him though, and you never see him in human
the
form. Like he's like eating cereal, he's in bed.
budget.
Um, well, and you know what? It can be kind of explained because let's face it, Deadpool's a little bit of a wild card, so it's certainly not without the. I mean, that Colossus is like, I'm always going to be metal. That way, he can never hurt me or never pull anything off. But yeah, to be like eating cereal in metal form. I just so
Don't
yeah,
they crack a joke at him about that though?
if I did, I never caught it, but that's just the one nitpick I had. So I'd like to see him actually have an actor, and the actor doesn't have to be huge. Like Colossus, his powers when he activates it, it does make him grow. I mean, I understand the person's got to be have
Hmm.
some size to him. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I hope they do it right because just to me in my world, everything is going to be kind of filler until we get to the next like Avengers. But even then, I want to see like a Dark Avengers. But I'm just going to be waiting for that X-Men team up movie
Hmm.
that shouldn't happen for another 5 years. But I want to see him start sprinkling in some stuff in the mutant world.
They're going to have to do it soon. My only fear is if they hold off, they're waiting to kind of reboot the whole thing altogether. Which, I mean, it's comic book movies. I'm sure they could do something like a
Yeah,
snap or something in the future that sets it all back. Or I just,
you could easily do that, and since they're losing some of the original actors, I mean, I guess it may make sense to them to just go ahead and reboot stuff. Uh, Start with another Iron Man, another Captain America, eventually another Thor. I hope they don't though. I don't necessarily think we need to we need Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans just to have the X-Men around. And perhaps maybe after a couple of years they decide, you know what, it wasn't so bad and come back into the role.
yeah, I mean, we've already fucked the Hawk over, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we will definitely see. All right. Well, just a little bit of news items there. Going to go ahead and roll into the end of the podcast here. We're just talking about a subject that you brought up on your YouTube channel that I definitely thought was interesting. So I did want to talk a little bit about it
Mhm.
here. And again, you can see that video up on Volsker's YouTube. I definitely say check that out. So the violence in video games, it really I've seen a meme, but it is really really true where it kind of shows you like all the horrific stuff that has happened in history, and it's like what remind me what video games did they play? It was before electricity, so obviously none.
Yeah,
Um, so it's really not. It just needs to stop. I think it's just something that politicians use.
it's an easy target.
It's an easy target. They used to blame rock and roll. Comic books were blamed at
Yeah.
one point. I mean,
Yeah,
hold
comic books were outlawed at one point, weren't they?
sure. I mean, they had to come up with these standards. Holding hands. I mean, so there's always something that. And I don't want to pick on older generation, as I'm pretty much there myself. But there's always just something I realize as a parent and just as a person is that just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that you can just make harsh generalities about it or say that
Hmm.
it's bad and destructive. Because I think history has definitely shown us that every time we point to something, Dungeons and Dragons is the devil, all that, all
Damn
that shit.
foosball.
Yeah, magic cards and all that shit. I
Pokemon, I think, even got blamed back in the day.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's all sorts of like crazy, church groups that just really go just crazy with that sort of thing. But I think history teaches us that we're not. You don't hear anyone saying that rock and roll is the devil anymore.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, we're on a
you know,
country that was founded by slavery and murder. Like,
Right,
let's be honest
exactly. And
here.
video games weren't around then. So it's a human condition. It's not to think that there's some magical content out there that can make you do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. That's just a real big cop out.
It is.
That's a way of looking like you're trying to solve a problem without actually doing anything about it. And that's
Uh,
all that really is. And absolutely, so kudos for calling that out. And if this issue sticks around, and it shouldn't. I've been around long enough, guys, kiddos. They do this about every 8 to 10 years. It goes away. So, but if it doesn't, you can definitely we'll be here to talk you through it. But it's complete BS. I did a study on it in college, which certain doesn't make me the ultimate authority. But if anything, they found that the only correlation between, or at least the strongest correlation between video games and violence is not the actual content, but the length of time that just the length of video games that are played.
mhm.
But I've played a whole hell of a lot of video games.
Yeah.
I've played them for days on end, and so I've never, hurt anyone like that. So even the length of games played, I mean, that certainly isn't, that's not going to fit for every situation. So, um,
I agree. I mean, it's getting ridiculous, and as I brought up in that point, because obviously it's a bit just whole opinion piece around how I feel about that.
hmm
It's starting to seep in. Like I mentioned with Walmart's big plastering, they're moving any promotional artwork or anything that draws in customers on certain games, and to me, that's a shot to the artist. Any voice actors, any
yeah,
developers. And so you're pulling that because you want to play down the line. You don't want to see favoritism over one or the other. And then now we have movies being canceled so that it doesn't offend anybody because you take this violence that's going on and the illnesses and whatever may be with those individuals, and now you're letting it seep and dictate what everybody else in the world enjoys. Like I mentioned, The Hunt was, whether you like that genre or not, they canceled a movie that you have actors and actresses, film crews, producers, writers, the actual film company themselves. It may never see the day of light because of this shit. Like, that's not fair for
which
those
is
art.
right, and it's complete bullshit because there's a movie. I don't even remember the movie's name, so perhaps I shouldn't talk about it. But anyway, I remember a movie. I think Ice-T was in it, where like he was literally hunted by a bunch of white people. I think it was called The Game. Actually, now that I think about it, The Game or something like that. The Game or The Hunt. Um, I don't know, late '90s or no, not late '90s. I think like early '90s, late '80s, somewhere around there. So that stuff out there still exists.
Hmm.
So I just think we need to give humans a little bit more credit and just to say that they're affected by things like this, and they're going to go out and kill and hurt people. And if we don't make this movie, or if we don't let this in our store, therefore giving GameStop a lifeline. I mean, GameStop, they're like, yeah, no, you don't want any violent video games in your store,
Hmm.
not at all. Well, they'll happily take that niche, believe me. Um, but it's just completely unjustified. People deserve more credit than that for sure.
By the way, that movie is Surviving the Game
Okay, almost had it.
with, oddly enough, with Gary Busey. So I can
Yes,
only
I
imagine how
was
that fucking
picturing
film
him, and
went.
I'm thinking, I pictured him like, no, I didn't guess not Gary Busey.
Yeah.
Okay, no, it was him. Yeah, exactly. Was it actually Ice T or was it like Omar Epps or something?
No, it was Ice-T was the
Okay,
homeless man that
okay.
they hunted. Yeah, it looks like Ice-T, Gary Busey, looks like John McGinley, which is I believe plays Dr. Cox and Scrubs. So there was a couple people in here. Yeah.
We need to do a Busey marathon, like
Oh
Busey
God.
marathon commentary. Start with like Die Hard, like a
Or that. Well, didn't he have a show
Predator
at one point?
2. Oh yeah, Life of Busey. Yeah, ridiculous.
Oh my God.
Gary Busey. Yep.
His son became an actor too, was it? Because he was in Starship Troopers.
Starship Troopers, and I've seen him. He's like a B-level movie actor, but yeah, I mean, it seems to be saner than his old man.
Oh shit.
Yeah, we gotta do that. We're gonna do a Busey marathon and do some commentary on him. But all right. Well, that is going to be the show for today. I'm of course D Square. Please at D Square 72. Please go ahead and send me some questions or some suggestions. I'm always open here. You have a great comment. I'd love to go ahead and shout it out here on the show. Of course, Volsker, as we talked about. He has a couple of YouTube videos out now, talking about comics as well as subjects like we just discussed here. And you can at him at Volsker on Twitter. Before we sign off here, you got anything for the folks?
No, that's pretty much it. Just like D Square mentioned, any comments, questions, if there's anything you like to see us bring up on the podcast, or anything we can address or talk about in videos, I'm always open to suggestions. Any comments, feedback, anything you guys want to say, all ears.
Alrighty, that is going to do it for tonight. So we're going to sign off now, everyone. Peace and love, and we'll see you again real soon.
Peace, everyone.